Thank you for sticking with us this afternoon. It is lovely to see you all. I am now joined by Dr. Mark Aldridge. He is a lecturer in film and television at the wonderful Solent University down in Southampton. Mark, it's lovely to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to our chat this evening.
Absolutely right. Now, what I've neglected to mention there is you are very much an all-round television expert. Is that not true?
I love telly, yeah, so it's something that I try and sneak into everything I do. So whatever I'm doing at work, bit of TV history, bit of film history, that's the stuff that I really get excited about. So I'll drip feed it in. Whether the students are always that excited about it, I wouldn't say, but I'm never going to say no to a bit of Dennis Potter in a lecture, for example, even if it is quite a few decades before they were born.
Listen, one should never say no to a bit of Dennis Potter. I think that's a very good thing you're doing for those students, it must be said. So where does this love of telly come from? Were you obsessed with television as a child?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, TV. But I come from a household where we all loved TV. It wasn't like there was no snobbishness about it. So television was something that we all watched and we all spoke about, and it was a massive part of sort of day-to-day conversation. I don't think it quite is in the same way now, but you could be pretty sure that even if people weren't, say, fans of a soap opera, they still would know roughly what's going on in EastEnders or Coronation Street. And I think we've lost a lot of that now with. There's loads of advantages to putting a whole series on Netflix at once, but it's a real shame that actually we don't seem to quite have the same communal experience that we used to. But yeah, TV is something I've always loved, much more even than film. Never been that interested in things like radio, unfortunately. TV for me has always been the thing. I just think it's great. I mean, you can do anything on TV. There are very few things that TV can't do better than everything else, if you ask me.
I love that passion. I love that passion. I also love radio. I won't hear a word said against it, but there we go. But television does. Television has a very democratic approach. I think it allows, particularly with the multitude of channels we have now. No, we know that all of it can't be good quality all the time, but it does allow people the chance to access it all together. And again, I think those communal experiences are coming from things like Netflix and stuff like that now. Interestingly, you mentioned soaps. You did mention soaps there. And I've seen a couple of people this week commenting on the reduction in numbers of episodes of EastEnders. And they say they are enjoying it more twice a week rather than however many times it's on a week. Do you think that television as a whole is more of a throwaway commodity now than it was previously?
It really depends, because actually there's lots of programs that have got longevity that you couldn't dream of in decades past, where even big prestigious shows like iClaudius, you see, if you didn't see it at the time and didn't happen to catch one repeat that might be a couple of years later, it was gone. So actually in a lot of ways those things are quite ephemeral. Now for the most part, actually, if you haven't seen, say, Stranger Things, it's still there for you on Netflix. You can now go and watch it. So I don't know about it being more throwaway, but I think that the soaps is a slightly different thing, where soaps have gone from being this sort of twice weekly sort of treat, and it's a little bit of something sandwiched within the schedules, to when they really reached their peak in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, it meant that they held up the schedule in a way that really they weren't quite designed to do, not in the way that it ended up being. So I know that ITV is I think particularly concerned that, because Coronation Street and Emmerdale are the things that bring the audience to them in the early evening, and generally that audience tends to stay with them. If you get rid of that reason for people to tune into you right away, you've got a really difficult proposal there. So I think ITV in particular will be nervous, but everyone should be. For me, of course, the quality is going to be better if you're down to 2 or 3 times a week. I think that's inevitable. You can't get away from that. But people still love them. I mean, the ratings aren't what they used to be, but there's still millions and millions of people who sit down and watch the big soap operas each evening. So they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, I can well imagine. But of course, the sphere we are here to talk about this afternoon is Agatha Christie on television, and those adaptations, successful or otherwise. Is Agatha Christie something you're a fan of anyway, above and beyond appearances on screen? Is Agatha Christie something you enjoy anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a fan of Agatha Christie ever since I was a child. I'd actually deliberately not done anything in my sort of professional life about Agatha Christie for a long time, because I enjoyed her work so much that there's nothing like killing the thing you love but than spending too much time with it. So I deliberately never really written about Agatha Christie until a few years ago. I wrote a little something for a conference that people kept picking up and kept asking me about. So I thought, well, there might be something here now. And I'd always been a bit annoyed that nobody had really told the history of the TV and film adaptations. That there are books that are lovely illustrated histories, which are now sort of 30 years out of date pretty much, but fantastic as they were, they're also out of date, and there's so much that we have access to now that is nothing, no criticism of the authors, but you just didn't have access to so much material in the 90s that you can now, including things like online archives, but also stuff like the actual Agatha Christie archive and stuff that's all much more accessible than it used to be. So I was a bit sort of frustrated that no one had done it, and I kept sort of asking whether anyone was doing this thing, and I found that they weren't, and so I decided to do it myself. So I did, and that was Agatha Christie On Screen that came out a few years ago, which has just been really quite a surprising success for me. People have really not stopped asking about it, so I haven't left Agatha yet.
Absolutely not. Is it a surprise? A great book. Is it a surprise insofar as you're being slightly denigrating to yourself? Because given the success and love that there is for Agatha Christie, people have taken the book, I think, to their hearts. Did you learn anything more about productions on screen of Agatha Christie adaptations whilst doing the book than you already knew?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say that half of what is in the book is absolutely brand new stuff, and a lot of it is stuff that you read time and time again, and the stories that are told and actually you end up seeing actually aren't necessarily true, or that they're only half of the truth. But it's always an ongoing process. That you're learning things all of the time, but definitely being able to go through stuff which I knew had never been gone through before, and that was brand new material. All sorts of discussions, especially from sort of 1970s onwards, where there was just so much to learn about why certain decisions were made. I'm still finding things now. In January, I was at the family archive, and there was a brand new box file that sort of was dusted off that had been found in a sort of corner that I hadn't had the chance to look at yet. And even from that, learning new things. So it never ends. Yeah, I think I'm quite surprised that so many people were interested in knowing the story behind it. I always knew there was interest in Agatha Christie On Screen, but it's not necessarily the case that people want to know the sort of background, sort of history. But in this case, they seem to, which was nice.
Very nice indeed. Anything in particular stand out for you as being particularly unusual that you discovered whilst writing the book?
Yeah, there were a few things. I think for me, the thing that I was most intrigued about, and that took me a really long time to try and get to the bottom to, was one of her most famous novels is Crooked House, and it was a personal favourite of hers, and it had never been adapted. There was a film of it finally a few years ago, but at that point, it'd never been adapted. I thought it was very strange. And then one day in the BBC archive files, going through stuff that was talking about adaptations for the radio, actually, there was a long list of ones that had been discussed with the Agatha Christie Limited to say which ones can we do. And next to Crooked House was just the most exciting little handwritten comment which said, "Will not allow use, family jinx on the book." And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is like a story of like a curse on this book. I mean, it's a very dark book, I won't ruin it, but if you've read it, you know why they might be a little bit sort of worried about it in some ways. So I sort of sat on it for a little while, and then I had the first interview I undertook with Agatha Christie's grandson, Matthew Pritchard, and I went to his house and we were having a chat about various things. And I thought, I don't know whether I can really ask someone who I don't know, is there a family jinx on this book? But we got on quite well. By the end of the interview, I said, look, I would just like to ask you this one thing. And I had a copy of the document. I sort of slid it across to him and I said, is there a family jinx on the book? And he picked it up and he looked at it and he studied it very, very carefully, and then looked at me and then burst into laughter and said, do you know, I think my mother just came up with very inventful ways to say no to these people sometimes. So I think that's all it was, really. It was just a great way to say, stop asking me about this one, we don't want you to do it, look, there's a curse or whatever, so don't bother us again. So,
how wonderful.
A lovely little story that was certainly new to me.
How lovely. That's absolutely superb. It was a labour of love, clearly, writing the book for you. At any point, did it feel like hard work, or was it just kind of a joy to immerse yourself in the subject of Agatha Christie from start to end?
The search really started to make me think, like, it was such a massive project. I knew it was a big project to begin with, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. My concern was not really about whether I could do it, but whether my publisher would let me do it, because it was contracted as a book that was, about 70,000 words, and the book is 160,000 words.
Wow.
I was both lucky and unlucky that I managed to get through quite a few editors, because there were lots of reshuffles in the business. So it meant that by the time I got to the last editor, who said, this is nearly 100,000 words over the word limit, I was like, oh no, I'd already discussed this with the previous editor, it'll be fine. So like, oh, okay. So that was I was a bit worried about. But the actual research note, it was huge, it was massive. For a little while, I took like bits out of it and thought I'll save that for another book. But in the end, most of it is in there. But I found loads since, so you know, I'll be back. An
update or an extra edition would be very welcome, I think.
Yeah, well, give me a few years and I'll definitely do something else. I've just finished a book about Poirot, because it's his 100th this year, and that's a history of everything from the books and the short stories and the plays, as well as the films and the radio and everything. So that's sort of quite a big comprehensive thing, which may be out this year, but who knows right now. But that has been something I've really been able to pick up new stuff, you know, lots of things that I didn't know before, including about the film and TV stuff. So I'm quite excited about that.
Excellent stuff. That sounds brilliant, and I'm sure a lot of people watching today will be very happy about that particular news. Why Poirot? Is that a particular love of yours?
Oh, it's because it's 100 years, and I was really thinking a couple of years ago that there didn't seem to be a sort of accessible general history of the whole story behind Agatha Christie's sort of mysteries, and that there are some fantastic biographies, but they're obviously about her as a person. And I was always quite interested in things like, well, why did they bring out that book that year? Why aren't there any short story collections, you know, in the 50s or whatever? Why did they make that film at that point? And I felt that sort of background story, which obviously concerns Agatha Christie, but isn't just her, had been sort of overlooked. So I was really pleased to you know, HarperCollins, who are her publisher, shared my opinions and were happy to sort of say yes to me doing one for Poirot, because the 100th year, it just seemed perfect, 100 years of Poirot, and with the new Death on the Nile film hopefully coming out in October. So whenever that comes out, my book is supposed to come out about a week after it, but who knows at the moment.
Well, fingers crossed. Again, sounds like a fantastic read. So all of this research and all of your years of watching TV, which in itself is research, let's be honest,
yes,
has made you something of an expert. So I'll have to ask you the question, what do you think are the ingredients for a perfect Agatha Christie adaptation on television?
I think that there's a really difficult line between it being very faithful and it working for TV. And actually people tend to focus on ones that make so many changes that therefore that's a really big problem. Well, that can be a really big problem, but actually you can have some really good fun with that as well. You know, in France, they do these bonkers adaptations that really aren't really adaptations of the story, but they're inspired by them. So they will take elements of what is in the original Agatha Christie novel, and they will do something pretty new with it, and they have their own detectives, but it's still taking like key elements. I think that's great. That can be a really good way to do it. I think for me, the stuff that doesn't work so well is when people say we've been really faithful and they're not, because you're sort of doing yourself a disservice there. You may as well really say we have taken Agatha Christie in a new direction, and sometimes that can work really well. I mean, obviously things like the Miss Marple series of the 80s up to 92 with Joan Hickson is often said to be, you know, the best series of adaptations, and I don't think I could really disagree with that. The Poirot with David Suchet are the same as well. But you can be a bit too faithful, and sometimes the material just isn't quite right for TV. I don't know that Tommy and Tuppence has ever been done quite as well as it could have been, and I include, I'm sorry to say, the early 80s series with Francesca Annis, which lots of people love, but I think it sort of slightly exposes why some of these short stories aren't quite enough for an hour of TV. I think Poirot did that much better later by finding ways to embellish it. So I think you've just got to be really confident with the direction that you've taken the story in, and stick with it. That's the recipe for me. I think that the best adaptations are the ones that take Agatha Christie's original, keep the core of the mystery, and do something a little bit extra with it. So the Billy Wilder Witness for the Prosecution film in the late 50s is probably the best adaptation. That and Evil Under the Sun in the early 80s, because they're both saying, yeah, this is the Agatha Christie mystery. These are the characters. A little bit of trimming here and there, but here is some extra characterization, some extra humor, some real sort of interesting cinematography, rather than just being a very sort of 3-hour version of a story that's got every last word. And I think that's only good for anybody.
No, absolutely. I've had similar discussions about the fact that one is a book, one is a television adaptation, and they're both, whilst trying to tell essentially the same story, they have to set about them in very different ways. So I'm never one for a particularly slavish adaptation. For you, is there anything that absolutely shouldn't be done with an Agatha Christie?
No, I think you should do anything. I'd be happy to see a Murderers Announced set on the moon in the year 5000. No one's taking away the original novels. I think as long as there is a degree of sort of being respectful to Agatha Christie as an author, then really you can do whatever you like. But again, it's just being fair about it and being really honest about it, rather than sort of implying that this is what Agatha Christie would have wanted, despite the fact she hated film and TV adaptations of her work. There's no way she would have wanted any of this, so let's not pretend. Let's just say we're doing something really interesting and we're doing something unusual. No, I'd love it. I don't think there's any reason why you can't set, you know, And Then There Were None on a moon base or something. Go for it, as far as I'm concerned. There shouldn't be any restrictions on it. And as we're only a couple of decades away from Agatha Christie slipping out of copyright in the UK, and when that happens, inevitably there's going to be millions of bonkers adaptations, most of which probably won't be any good, but some will. So I think, well, you may as well start to do that now whilst you've got some control over it. But I'm not in charge of anything, so it's
if you were, I would be paying very good money to see And Then There Were None on the Moon. I'm in complete agreement. I'd be completely on board to see that. Like you say, it doesn't affect the fact the other adaptations that we've got, and the book is always going to exist. It doesn't change that fact. So no, I'm absolutely on board. On that kind of note, and you mentioned while we were talking, you mentioned Joan Hickson's Miss Marple, and like you say, you know, it's taken as the definitive, and one can see why when you look at it. Without meaning to sound too mean-spirited, it's a very good example of where things can go wrong. For example, the ITV adaptation, much more recently, has not been held in quite such high esteem. What do you think, if anything, what do you think kind of went wrong there? Why didn't the nation take that version to their hearts in the way that they had with Joan Hickson?
Well, it's funny because I was talking about this the other day to somebody, and it was, I would instinctively say the same as you, that people didn't seem to really sort of like it in the same way as Joan Hickson's did. And it didn't work for me. For me, it felt a bit cheap. It felt like there wasn't the care and attention had gone into it that I think that the material deserved. I was much more bothered by that and some poor scripts than I was about the actual changes. I thought actually it just weren't terribly well written. I don't mind too much what you do with it, and some of the casting was weak. But if you actually go and look on, like I do, on things like Facebook groups, and when there are, or Agatha Christie on Facebook, something will ask on their page, it'll say, you know, who's your favourite Miss Marple, or pick about. Loads of people will actually point to those ITV Marples, and actually a lot of people are nostalgic for them because they're starting to get quite old now, especially the earlier ones. Quite a lot of people actually are now saying, oh, well, for me, Geraldine McEwen was always my Marple. I actually always want to say that I think Geraldine McEwen is fantastic, or was a fantastic actor, who I think gives a terrible performance in it. And I think you can see her going, oh, I'm just going to take the money and run for this. I think she's really not doing it, putting any great effort into it. I think Julia Mackenzie is fantastic. She's got some of the weakest scripts, but she does amazing stuff with very, very little. So I think Julia Mackenzie actually does a really brilliant job of holding her episodes together. I think Jodie McEwen, for whatever reason, was not putting the effort in, I'm sorry to say. So she's a real weakness for me in that series. But who cares? Because so many people now say, no, she's the one that I loved, including diehard Agatha Christie fans I know have said to me, oh, she's always my favourite. So there's always someone for everybody.
Absolutely. I absolutely couldn't agree more. Is there anything that has not been adapted, any Agatha Christie at all that's not been adapted, that you would dearly, dearly love to see adapted for the screen?
Yeah, there's quite a few things that haven't been adapted. There's only a handful of novels, and they're mostly her sort of thrillers. But the thing that has never been adapted for the screen properly, that really should be, are the Miss Marple short stories. That actually very few of them have made it to screen. A couple of them was sort of slightly part of one of the ITV Marple episodes, and there's a Japanese anime series that adapts a few of them. But actually, most of them, and there aren't that many, haven't been adapted, and I think that would be a great mini-series, actually. And I think that's a really good example of where actually Agatha Christie adaptations could work really nicely on a streaming service like Netflix or Prime, because the idea that you can fit all of these mysteries into a uniform running length is bonkers, because you can't, because some of them are like 7 or 8 pages long and some of them are 50. Yes. So it would be great to be able to have a streaming service that would say, okay, well, it doesn't matter if this episode is 25 minutes long and the next one's 75 minutes. They do it with, you know, Orange is the New Black and all sorts of other
Absolutely
things.
Right.
So,
yes,
so that would be great for Agatha Christie short story adaptations to go, oh, it's a 20-minute one this week or tonight, and then tomorrow night you'll watch one that's an hour. That's what I'd really love to see.
You're right. I think actually that's a really good way of using the streaming format, where having a television slot doesn't matter. It's worked very well, like you say, for other programs. And in fact, that's got me thinking, I think that would be a really, really good way of doing it. So we'll start a campaign. Have you ever had the chance to visit on set whilst any of the Agatha Christie more recent things are being? I mean, you're a very young man. While the more recent things have been made.
Not a very young man. Thank you. But no, unfortunately not. No, there was some sort of chat about for this Poirot book, but it ended up, I think, you know, people are very secretive and they don't necessarily want people on set. No, unfortunately not for Agatha Christie, but often have seen places, obviously, where they filmed. I go to Torquay a lot, which is where she was born and she lived for a long time. But that's also where several adaptations have taken place in the south of Devon. So it's always lovely to go back and see places where they film. But no, unfortunately not on set for me.
I mean, you've talked there about, and anyone who knows me knows I love a good television location visit. Love it. There's something about it really connects you to those programs, particularly if the program is for some reason slightly older and the location still looks very much the same. For you and for those watching who maybe haven't done a bit of an Agatha Christie TV locations tour, what are kind of your top spots to visit?
Definitely South Devon. You've got to go to Burr Island, which was the place where she was inspired, or she was inspired by, to write And Then There Were None and Evil Under the Sun. And Evil Under the Sun, the David Suchet version, was also filmed there in part, and a little bit of the Joan Hickson Nemesis actually opens with a shot of Burr Island as well, with this beautiful Art Deco hotel that's right in the middle of it. So that's definitely the place to go, in various places around Torquay and Paignton and so on, Dartmouth, because there's so much in the south of Devon which is loving of Agatha Christie, including her holiday home, her beautiful house, Greenway, which is now owned by the National Trust, and anybody can go and visit. And that's where I would recommend the most. It did surprise me. I did go on a brief sort of pilgrimage to the Poirot apartment blocks once, because I was just down the road, and so I thought, oh, I should go and see it. And it's never quite the same when you turn around from a Tesco Express and you see it sort of just at the side of you. So some of the illusion was lost a bit, I have to admit.
It does take that sort of period waft away from it
Yes.
all, doesn't it? Somewhat.
Yeah,
I've been to Burr Island myself, and I would absolutely second that. It is full of that feeling of Agatha Christie, particularly if you can walk across and you don't have to get the
your tide times right.
Absolutely right. It's brilliant. It's a lovely thing to do, and I would thoroughly recommend it. For someone who maybe hasn't seen any TV adaptation, I can't think who would, but for someone who hasn't, what do you think would be the ideal place to begin to watch Agatha Christie on television?
I would actually say, unless you're somebody who's very comfortable already with slightly older TV, I would go in with the BBC And Then There Were None from 2015. So a more recent one, because it's faithful. It obviously makes a few changes, but it's absolutely Agatha Christie story. It's stylish. It's really sort of beautifully made and really genuinely tense. And I think you should always start with one of the best, because then you know if it's your thing or not. Because if you watch that and you go, oh, I don't like that sort of thing, then it's never going to be for you. But I think you're likely to watch that and go, yeah, that was good, that was clever, I want to see what else Agatha Christie has done. And then you can dig deep into the David Suchet Poirots and the Joan Hickson Miss Marples. And I think you're in pretty safe hands with those.
I couldn't agree more. I love that adaptation and everything we've been talking about. Our time has come to an end, but I must say a huge thank you, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Now, remind us of the title of the book.
So Agatha Christie On Screen is my book from a few years ago, but you can also pre-order my new book. Just search for Poirot and Mark Aldridge and you'll find it. That's out towards the end of the year, fingers crossed.
I am hugely looking forward to it. It's been lovely to chat. Thank you ever so much. Take care, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, Mark. Bye-bye.